You've got your editor window. Great! Now remember that heart you've made? You had to draw it somewhere, hadn't you? You had to draw it in a canvas. And much like we call the display area an editor window, we will call our canvas a GraphView. This will be what allows us to draw those nodes and grid you see in the screen right now. But we'll actually have two canvases in the final result, which are the GraphView and the toolbar. For now though, we'll start by creating our GraphView. A GraphView is an experimental API Unity made and that's used in stuff like shader graph. Because it's experimental, it means that it can change at any moment. But because it is used in tools used by many, it is possible that the changes won't be drastic. The API will offer us useful classes and methods for us to build our node-based dialog system. Let's start by creating our GraphView script. In our Windows folder, right-click in the project window and create a new C# script. I'll name it ds-graphview. Again, if you name it GraphView, remember that you'll need to specify the namespace in the inheritance. Opening it up, we have our default monobehavior script. Feel free to remove the start and update methods from here. Then we'll need to make sure this script is inheriting from GraphView class, so swap that out with monobehavior. If it doesn't recognize the class, we simply need to import its namespace. I'll make it some namespace Windows and you can do the same if you are using namespaces as well. We now have our GraphView, so the next thing we have to do is to add it to our editor window. To do so, let's open up our editor window script. In here, we'll add our GraphView when we open the window. We could possibly do that in our open method, but we are not going to use that one for this. By the time I made this tutorial, I've used the onEnable method to do it, so you'll be seeing that now. However, it is likely that you should be using the createGUI method instead to add UI to your editor window. So while I'll be using the onEnable method, feel free to swap it to the createGUI method instead. Inside, we simply create a new method called addGraphView. And inside of that method, we'll need to initialize our GraphView and then add it to the editor window root visual element. Let's start this off by typing in ds-graphview, which I'll name it GraphView, equals a new ds-graphview. Then we add it to the root visual element by typing it root visual element.add and pass in GraphView. Saving it up and going to Unity, we see nothing new showing up in our window. There are two reasons on why that happens. When we create a GraphView, we are not really giving it any size. We are doing the correct thing by adding it to the editor window, but because its size is defaulted to 0, we won't be able to see anything. Thankfully, we can use a method Unity provides called stretchToParentSize. There is also a stretchToParentWidth, but because we want both the width and the height, we'll go with the first one. So type in GraphView.stretchToParentSize. If it doesn't recognize this method, make sure you are importing its namespace. This will make the GraphView stretch to the width and height of the editor window even if you resize it. Saving up, we still see nothing showing up. That's because this is our canvas, and by itself, unless we update its styles, it will show as being transparent. Some canvases like the toolbar come with a default color, but the GraphView doesn't. In our final result, the grid background that you see is not the canvas itself, but an element that we'll add to it. That element class is named gridBackground. So to create it, let's head back to our GraphView script and create it by first creating a constructor for our script, as the constructor is already being called by the editor window. So type in public and ds-graphview, and inside we'll create a method named addGridBackground. In here we'll make a variable of type gridBackground, which I'll name gridBackground and call its constructor. The gridBackground also comes with a default size of 0, so I need to make sure we call gridBackground.stretchToParentSize. Make sure you import the namespace as well. Then we'll need to add it to the GraphView, but we need to make sure it's added under everything else, so we use the insert method to place our grid background at the position of index 0. If we save and go back to Unity, we shall now be seeing a dark background in our editor window.